and welcome to this episode of Getting to Know Our Heavenly Family. Today, I want to take us back to the 1200s to meet Saint Elizabeth of Portugal, not to be confused with Elizabeth of Hungary, who was the great aunt of Elizabeth of Portugal. So, very closely related, but different people. So, Elizabeth of Portugal was born in 1271 into the royal house of Aragon. She was educated very piously and led a life of strict regularity from her childhood. She said the full divine office daily, that is, the liturgy of the hours, fasted, and did other penances. Elizabeth's marriage to Denis of Portugal was arranged in 1281 when she was 10 years old, and in 1288 the wedding was celebrated, when Denis was 26 years old and Elizabeth was 17. She quietly pursued the regular religious practices of her youth and was devoted to the poor and sick. Because she lived in the royal court, such a life was taken as a reproach to many around her and caused ill will in some quarters. Eventually, her prayer and patience succeeded in converting her husband, the king, who had been leading a sinful life of spousal abuse and adultery. Elizabeth took an active interest in Portuguese politics and was influential in peace negotiations. She had two children, one of whom was a son named Afonso, who later became the King of Portugal. Elizabeth would serve as intermediary between her husband and her son during the Civil War of 1322 to 1324. The prince, Afonso, greatly resented the king, whom he accused of favoring the king's illegitimate son. The king was prevented from killing his own son through the intervention of Queen Elizabeth when she, in 1323, mounted on a mule and positioned herself between both opposing armies on the field in order to prevent the combat, which is the image we see here. After Denis's death in 1325, Elizabeth retired to the monastery of the Poor Clares in Coimbra. She joined the Third Order of St. Francis, devoting the rest of her life to the poor and the sick in obscurity. She donated flour from her cellars during a famine. She also was modest in her dress and humble in conversation. She was known for providing lodging for pilgrims, distributing small gifts, paying the dowries of poor girls so they could get married, and educating the children of poor nobles. She was a benefactor of various hospitals and of religious projects. Once more, she was called to act as a peacemaker in 1336 when her son Afonso IV marched his troops against the King of Castile, to whom he had married his daughter Maria and who had neglected and ill-treated her. In spite of age and weakness, Queen Elizabeth, the Dowager Queen, insisted on hurrying to the battle site where the two armies were drawn up. She again stopped the fighting and caused terms of peace to be arranged. But the exertion brought on her final illness. As soon as her mission was completed, she took to her bed with a fever from which she died on the 4th of July. She earned the title of Peacemaker on account of her efficacy in solving disputes. Elizabeth of Portugal was beatified in 1516 and canonized by Pope Urban VIII in 1626. Worldwide, her feast is celebrated on July 4th. However, here in the United States, we transfer her feast to July 5th, so we can celebrate Independence Day on the 4th. Saint Elizabeth of Portugal, pray for us.